All right, welcome to the Latest.com show. I'm Igor Darish. Joining me from Toronto, he's a contributor to the Latest.com, a staff writer at Ishihawk, all the way from Canada. It's Eric Carrier, and he's a military vet and Latest.com senior political correspondent, a title he got by calling dibs on it. All the way from Pittsburgh, it's Josh Patton. And he's a 24-year veteran of the U.S. State Department and the author of We Meant Well, How I Helped to Lose the War, the Battle for the Hearts and Minds of the Iraqi People, live from New York. It's Peter Van Buren. Peter, you spent years stationed in post-Saddam Iraq, and yesterday Defense Secretary Ashton Carter announced that the U.S. will once again begin direct action on the ground in Iraq. How do we mess this up so bad that we're sending troops back, and are these troops really necessary?
I listened to that yesterday, stunned, absolutely stunned. I can't believe that we are re-engaging on the ground in Iraq, and anybody who thinks this is over and that the United States has taken, the last step it's going to take in this conflict is an absolute fool. Let's look back real quick at the history. We left Iraq in 2011 at the very end of the year, and we managed to stay the heck out for about 2 years or so. In summer of 2014, Obama brought us back in, claiming that the Yazidi people in northern Iraq, who no one had really heard of before, needed to be saved from ISIS, and there was going to be a brief humanitarian mission. That morphed into a bombing campaign, which morphed into bombing in Iraq and Syria, which morphed into over 3,000 American trainers on the ground in Iraq, which now has morphed into, despite the promises of no boots on the ground in both Iraq and Syria. Once you start that kind of escalation, there's really not an easy end to it. You can't say, well, we're going to put these commandos in, and if they get in trouble, well, gosh, we're going to need some more guys to help them out, and we're going to have a logistical chain that's going to go in there. We've got to have search and rescue to pull them out. We need medical. We need this. We need that. And all of a sudden, you've got a bunch of people in there. As another example, when you talk about Delta Force or one of these people going in to raid, oftentimes what you need around them is blocking forces. You don't want to have the bad guys have access to the same house that you're inside of raiding. Typically, that work is done by Rangers or an airborne unit. We saw that, I think, in Black Hawk Down, for example, in the public media. Well, where are those people? You're going to let the Kurds do that? You're going to let the Iraqi army do that? The Shia militias under Iranian control do that? No. This is an open door now to increased engagement, and I'm not sure where the end is, and I'm not sure what the goal is.
I think the scary part, Josh, how concerning is it that we're just now he's saying, yes, we're going to do direct action on the ground, but we know that they've already done direct action on the ground because a Delta commando died just last week. And I'm willing to bet that wasn't the first mission of that nature that happened.
Peter's right in that whenever you send troops, especially the more troops you send, the more people they need to support them. If you have a post with, 5,000-10,000 troops, a lot of those, as mechanics to keep the vehicles running, human resources people to handle pay and benefits. It's an entire operation. But that said, I haven't really heard any, or at least found yet, any specific troop figures that Carter's talking about. And we already have troops on the ground there, in the quote-unquote advisory role already. So I think really what's happening is that they're being sort of more forthcoming about what is going on in Iraq. And, the fact that they are saying that we're going to be doing more ground raids, whatever that means in this context, I don't think that necessarily means this is Iraq War II, but I also think that the ISIS threat has been underestimated by Iraq War III, yes. No, the other one was Kuwait. We didn't actually go in. It was like a prelude to war. But again, I don't think that this means this is going to be a huge huge thing this time. But you never know, because, again, it's not up to us. It's up to really however the troops and the commanders are handling us. That mission is. I think that's the question we should be asking, is what is their mission, rather than hemming and hawing about what this means in terms of a larger Iraq conflict.
Well, Iraq is one thing, but Carter also mentioned Syria, perhaps. And if we can't, are we going to go put boots on the ground in Syria? And isn't that going to put us on a collision course with Russia, Peter?
Well, sure. Carter mentioned that one of the strategies, one of the goals, if you will, is for whatever side we're supporting to take back Raqqa, the city where ISIS is sort of centered, if you will. And he said that we're going to have direct action there. We're going to have trainers on the ground. You're opening a door here that the president told us over a year ago was shut. He was explicit about not putting combat troops in there in either country, that this was going to be an air campaign, a support campaign, what have you. That isn't what's happened. And I agree with Josh that we don't really know where this goes. I mean, we can't predict the future, but the curve is definitely in the escalation mode here. And that's what very much concerns me. At the same time, this idea of mission is very important. What are you hoping to accomplish? And realistically, can you accomplish that? Right now,
Peter, if I can just jump in for a second. I mean, but my other part of my point that I maybe didn't make clear or didn't make clear enough was that, when they said that thing that Obama said about no troops on the ground, I mean, that was bullshit when he said it. I think that anyone, at least in the military, knew that anytime you say, we're going to go up to this line in a military mission, and this is the line we're going to only go up to, it's either going to work or what, we're going to walk away. We've never done that in the history of the country, except maybe Reagan in Lebanon, maybe.
How'd that work out?
But I do think you're right that the trend is toward escalation. But again, I feel like it's more that what they're admitting to is catching up to the reality versus them actually ramping things up. But if they're telling us, it means that probably is coming.
Yeah, and the catching up with reality, I had a piece this week, which I caught a lot of flack over prior to Carter's statement, suggesting that all the noise that was being made about the Delta Force guy, Josh Wheeler, getting killed was really part of prepping the battlefield, getting Americans ready to accept casualties coming back out of these wars. So, no, I agree with you completely. The concern on my part is both for escalation per se, and also the idea that this seems to be escalation without really much of a plan behind it. We don't know what else to do, so we might as well escalate. The strategy is, as best I can figure it out, and the goal, as best I can figure it out, is kill every ISIS guy. And I think, you're laughing at that because it makes no sense. I mean, ISIS, in fact, has done a terrific job of recruiting more people and for pulling in people in the region to support that. And so some kind of campaign of attrition, which is what kill every ISIS guy basically translates into, is destined to fail. It's failed throughout America's wars. It basically is what drove us out of Vietnam in the end, is the other side was able to sustain more casualties than we were willing to do. And I suspect the same thing will happen here. We can't blow up every ISIS fighter, and that seems to be the only sort of argument we've made so far. It will not work.
Well, okay, so with Syria, we now have, we're at war with Iraq, Syria, Yemen, doing operations in Pakistan, Afghanistan. Eric, are we just in the war with the entire Middle East now, and is Canada going to help?
Well, I hope Canada doesn't help. Trudeau says he's pulling out the troops, so that's good. But now that it's my turn to maybe have a chance to talk, I'd like to add to the previous conversation a little bit. I do agree.
I'm sorry, Senator Webb.
Yeah.
Please. I'm running independent now. But I find it interesting because having studied the Cold War extensively, and Vietnam was one of my main focuses. You see a lot of parallels now, which disappeared for a while, actually, because following Vietnam War, we learned a couple things. When the U.S. commits to a war, they can never do it in stages. It always has to be a full commitment from the beginning, or it'll turn into another quagmire. Well, this is what we're seeing happening now in Iraq. We're just slowly building it up, and it's going to be a failure. Number two, especially when we went into the first George Bush presidency, was that any American war had to have minimal to no casualties. And we've seen that more and more now with the drone strikes and fighting war without actual boots on the ground. But once again, that rule has now been broken as we're recommitting to Iraq. So I find it interesting to see that all these lessons we've learned through history and really have avoided for a while as much as we can have been forgotten suddenly. And it's interesting because I think, the Middle East for the U.S. is their modern-day Vietnam, and they're going to be stuck in there as long as they're trying to police the globe. And part of that is trying to still prove themselves to Russia that they're a credible nation that's willing to stand up for their allies. And in a way, maybe we are entering a second Cold War. It's possible.
Well, here's the thing, Eric. I just think it's the difference between Vietnam and the Muslim, the global jihad problem is that, the Vietnamese weren't coming over to America or planning to go to Europe to attack civilians. I mean, the terrorism threat is real. It's not nearly perhaps what has been made to be or how it's been employed in our national rhetoric. People have been played fast and loose with playing the terror card, but that doesn't change the fact that, just not even a month ago, in Turkey, ISIS, or someone, I don't remember who, I thought it was ISIS, but there was a big explosion during a peace rally. These things will happen. So I do think that you're right that there are some parallels, but I do think the threat isn't as existential as, say, the threat of the Soviet Union was.
But I think you have to look at it contextually. Everything is contextual to the time period. So at the time, communism was the major threat. Now terrorism is our modern-day threat. Not to downplay the role of terrorism, it is very strong. But I'm sure if you were to talk to any people living in countries that border the Soviet Union or in more poor regions, it was a very real threat that communism would spill over and infect their country.
Well, it's important to remember, and unfortunately, I'm old enough to have lived through the Cold War in real time. The threat was that the Russians were coming. They were coming in terms of nuclear attack on us. We weren't saying that the Russians were going to sneak over our borders or anything like that. But the idea was that at any moment, Russian missiles could start falling on the United States. And I remember as a kid in elementary school, we had drills where we hid under our desk and were told that if the missiles came, we should stay away from the windows. And there was lots of talk of that.
And
Going to the Vietnam War, it's important to remember that there were people who were claiming, this is where the phrase, if we don't fight them over there, we'll fight them over here, that at some point the North Vietnamese would be storming the beaches of California. That was actually mentioned seriously in some vein. So there's a long history of this and a lot of contextual parallels, as Eric was pointing out. I think the thing that makes this far worse than the Vietnam War, of course, is that there are so many other sides here. In Vietnam, we were supporting one side and fighting against the other side, and they had their supporters, yada, yada. But, it was still basically a binary kind of thing. With the Middle East, there's so many different players. But all that said, I think the question of terrorism is all too often, as you said, play the terrorism card, is used as a justification for almost everything, and the level of fear is artificially cranked up. The United States has suffered one cataclysmic terror event in its entire history, and that was 14 years ago. With respect to the dead, and I live here in New York, with respect to the dead, we have killed off, sacrificed, if you will, almost double the number of Americans in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan as died on 9/11. And we have also revisited our democracy and put in place things that have taken away our basic rights, all of these things. And the terrorist attacks that have been provoked against us and have been provoked in Europe are largely, on a geopolitical scale, not much more than sort of annoying crimes. We've talked here before about the mass shootings in the United States that have taken far more lives than terrorism. I think we need to keep this all in respect. And then one final point would be, we also need to ask ourselves how much our actions in the Middle East are actually creating terrorists, in ramping up the threat, and in fact bringing this war into a larger context. Certainly, if Turkey was not involved in the fighting in the Middle East, it's very doubtful that ISIS would find any point in setting off bombs in rallies inside Turkey. There's a lot of issues here, but it's very hard to find a positive side to it.
All right. Well, to shift gears real quick, the next Republican debate is tonight. It's the first debate that Donald Trump is not first in the polls. Ben Carson's now first in Iowa, and he's overtaken Donald at least one national poll. Josh, is this the inevitable downturn we all foresaw for Trump, or is he going to be able to make up ground after tonight's debate?
Here's the thing. It is interesting. Anyone who says they know what's going to happen with Trump or the election is full of shit. So, I mean, the answer to that question is always we have no idea, because Trump shouldn't exist. You know, he shouldn't have been the front runner for 4 months of the 6 that he was. And the fact that, you know, the Ben Carson is the replacement, who's, I mean, the only difference between him and Trump is that he's nicer. Like, he's a little more soft-spoken, a little more humble, but he's just as, if not more, inept when it comes to, you know, again, one of the pieces I did this week was there in talking to interviewers, he was unable to explain his own Medicare policy and his own plan to use private savings accounts. And the follow-up question was simply, okay, so then his statement was that he was going to, you know, people would just choose his plan over Medicare because it would be better. And when he was asked if that's going to involve, he wouldn't answer. Not that he wouldn't. He seemed like he couldn't answer because he had no idea. So it will be interesting to see, you know, when Trump was at the top, no one could just take a shot at Trump because he's going to come back just as hard and probably win. But with Carson, and especially with the stuff being not so much him talking about, you know, undocumented immigrants or abortion or even the policing thought on college campuses, it's about policy. So I think that anyone gunning for the outsider, whether it's Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, or even Ted Cruz, who I think is most likely to pick up their voters once Carson and Trump are inevitably ruled out, it's going to be very interesting to see because Carson's going to probably be on the defensive.
Well, I completely understand like why Donald Trump is so popular. He's outspoken. He says these, you know, crazy things that people can get behind. But what makes Ben Carson so popular? It's mind-blowing. We talked about last week, obviously in Iowa, it's the evangelical thing, but the CBS poll has him first nationwide now. How is he appealing to this many voters?
Well, I would say, one, for the Republican voters, he taps into that religious side. He plays the kind of radical religiosity very well. He appeals to them. He has that calm demeanor that you can trust, that he knows what he's talking about, even when he is saying crazy things. I mean, I think what he said recently, or maybe a couple months ago, that Obama would run for a third term or something that he knows is absolutely untrue. But for some reason, he tries to believe that it could actually happen, as if, you know, Obama's some tyrannical dictator that wants to take our guns and, you know, put us down. But yeah, I guess it's his calm demeanor. He comes across as, like, you know, the soft-spoken grandfather that you can trust.
Peter, what is it about Ben Carson that taps into the American psyche? Is it just a religious thing, or is there something else here?
It's tough to really say. I mean, I agree with my colleagues here. I mean, I can't figure out what Ben Carson is doing. I mean, you listen to him sometimes, you get the impression that somebody just kind of hauled him into a room and said, pretend you're running for president and say something about that. He doesn't really seem to stand for anything. I mean, he's got his sort of anti-abortion and anti-this, and, he's got the usual Republican antis. But you can find that in pretty much anybody who says they're a hardcore Republican. I suspect that a lot of his support is simply because people are getting bored with Donald Trump. And he's the most likely candidate to pick up the crazies from Donald Trump at this point. Other than that, I really don't even understand why he's in the race or what he's hoping to achieve. I suspect, though, that the real fun tonight, first of all, of course, Trump will always be good for a few laughs, and he'll come out swinging against Carson for sure. But I think the question is going to be whether or not the Bush campaign implodes tonight, whether Ted Cruz implodes tonight, whether Mike Huckabee, shows up and implodes tonight. I mean, this field is big, and it's not serving anybody's needs at this point in time. There's a handful of these candidates that everybody knows has no chance whatsoever. They're basically campaigning in hopes of either increasing their public profile or maybe getting a cabinet position at some point if there's a Republican president. But, I mean, it's really time for these guys to sort themselves out, and it's possible that we'll see the first step on that tonight. So we'll see where we go.
Well, the one thing about Ben Carson that I feel that no one's brought up that may speak a little bit to his appeal, and it's indelicate to sort of talk about, though, but it's his race. I mean, it's undeniable that part of what made Obama's candidacy in 2008 so exciting for people was not so much the substance of what Obama said, even though he could spin a good speech, and it wasn't so much that, the message of the campaign and the organizational structure that they had or the insane amounts of money he raised, although, of course, that all played a role. But there was just something fun about the idea of electing the first black president. And I think that it's at all possible that the Republican primary candidacy field is more, racially diverse than the Democratic one this time around is a huge, huge boon to Republicans. And I think that part of what they like about Ben Carson is that it speaks to the idea that if you're a racist, you're a Republican. Not that all Republicans are racist, but all racists probably vote Republican. And I think there's something about being able to say, no, Ben Carson, he's my guy. And not even bring up the race that's satisfying to those voters. So I think that there's that kind of appeal on the other side of it. For the Democrats, it was about electing the first black president. For the Republicans, I think getting behind Ben Carson shows I'm not a racist. And I think that for a lot of, well-meaning, conservative-minded folks, that's important to them.
Fair enough. I have African American friends too, but I think not to be too flip about it, but I mean, race was so 2008. This time around, the meme seems.
I know this time it's gender. If you listen to Hillary,
it's gender exactly. And I think if the Republicans had any brains left at all, they would be digging deep, trying to find a strong woman candidate, at least to take on a VP, a vice presidential role, because Hillary is making huge gains off of the idea that you can again be part of history here. Just like in 2008, you were part of history by electing the first African American president. You can be part of history again by putting the first woman in the White House. It's a persuasive argument to a lot of our population, particularly gay and lesbian voters, certainly women voters, and a lot of the more liberal Democratic voters who still remember the buzz, from 2008. So the Republicans can maybe milk Carson to an extent, But boy, if I was head of the Republican National Committee, would I be out there beating the bushes trying to find a powerful woman candidate, and I don't think Carla Fiorina is close to it, to put up on that stage.
Well, since you mentioned the crazies, there was a new poll this week that showed that the Tea Party support is down to a historical low of 17%, down from 2010 when it was about 32%. You know, why is it that Ben Carson and his evangelical viewpoint and Donald Trump and his nationalistic viewpoint resonate with so many people, yet it doesn't really, with so many people that are allowed on the internet and want to vocalize all this, but it doesn't seem like it's really resonating with a large majority of the country. Are we nearing the beginning of the end of the Tea Party, and are they really still relevant, Peter?
I guess you don't read the comment section on Latest.com, because it seems like there's a fair number of Tea Party supporters that jump in there here and there.
That's what I mean.
They're
the loudest,
part of that
is the thing, very few.
I think a big part of it, and then I'm sorry, I'll yield to Josh. Is just the idea first that these surveys focus on these button words, and so, I'm a Tea Party person, or I'm an evangelical, and nobody sort of parses out what that really means to folks. It tends to be very, very crude, at least as it ends up getting filtered through the media to us. But I think a lot of those people have kind of spread out, if you will. A lot of the early Tea Party support was based on some odd notions about reducing taxes and shrinking the size of government. And I think that has sort of changed. I think a lot of the hardcore Republican voters, the crazies that Josh referred to, now have sort of turned away from the tax thing. And this is where the whole idea came from. Tea Party was, the Boston Tea Party during the American Revolution. Now they've turned to the anti-gay, anti-abortion stuff. Obama's a Muslim. They're going to take our guns away. Fill in the crazy thing of your choice. So it doesn't surprise me that a survey shows Tea Party support is down, but I suspect most of the people who previously identified that way are still out there, still firmly on the Republican side. They may just be picking up different labels. But I'm sorry, Josh, I cut you off there.
The only point I was going to say is that I think that the, just like the Freedom Caucus in the House of Representatives is a relatively small number of Republican representatives, there's enough of them that they have the power to stop things from happening, maybe not make things happen. And I think that's sort of a nice metaphor for how it is in the real world with conservative media, because, Fox News, it's right slant, varies when whoever's on the screen. If it's someone like Bill O'Reilly, it's not as far to the right as if it's Hannity. Then it's but even those guys are too mainstream for. I can't. His name's escaping me. The guy from Iowa who wants to make criminals slaves. I can't think of his name. But these guys that are ultra conservative, they are very powerful in that they hold the media in a way that, or at least the attention of the type of voters Republicans want to get. They control their opinions. Laura Ingraham. She essentially got Eric Cantor, the person who should have been taking over for John Boehner in January of 2013, unseated in his primary election. He was the second most powerful Republican in the House of Representatives, and he was assassinated, politically speaking, by a conservative radio host. So the fact that the conversation that conservatives are having amongst themselves is the rhetoric is ratcheted up so high to have any chance of being elected, you have to appeal to that lowest common denominator. Obama is a Muslim. He's coming to take our guns. If only we could, spread the blood of patriots on the tree of liberty or whatever that stupid quote is.
Eric, we often
talk
about
this is what always bites the
Go ahead, Peter.
Oh, no, I'm just a quick follow-up. This is what always bites the Republicans in the ass. the stuff that they need to win locally, either as representatives or in a national campaign to get the delegates, doesn't play to a mass audience. They can't translate that into any kind of moderate votes or Democratic votes or even their own sort of soft Republican support. And this thing has just confounded them election after election. They really need to sort that out if they want to have a chance.
That's definitely true nationally, but I think they've actually done it very successfully locally, and that's why they're running the House right now. I was just going to say that, Eric, we often talk about how in America we have a few wealthy and powerful people that are perverting democracy. Isn't it? What does it say about our democracy when just a small sliver of people are able to bring the whole political process to a halt, as the crazies have done? Is this good for democracy or bad for democracy? Right. Well, right. We have that, but I'm talking about from the bottom. I'm talking about like the Tea Party folks, the conservative folks that are electing like the people like in the Freedom Caucus and those types of people, and then they just completely slow government in its tracks. I mean, we can't even elect federal judges anymore.
I think it shows how broken the system is when things like that can stall it, prevent proper legislation from being passed, yet they still get voted in because somewhere deep in a southern state, this community only votes Republican. So every election, a Republican candidate's elected in that one spot. And that happens across the country all throughout certain regions. And then they have enough people representing them in Congress, and they're able to filibuster or block legislation any way they see fit. And I think that highlights that there is a massive problem with the system. And barring Bernie Sanders' political revolution, what can we do, though? Because time and time again, we still vote these people in, or we're faced with an even worse situation where both candidates are terrible and possibly agree on certain things that we do not like, and there's nothing we can do. It's pick the best of the two, and in the case where both are bad, how do you choose?
Well, one topic that certainly won't be discussed in tonight's debate is police brutality. We all saw that horrible video of the South Carolina cop hurling the girl across the classroom. And even after the sheriff fired him, he still said that the girl who was thrown started it. She was just sitting at her desk. I mean, does a lack of compliance justify the brutality that we saw in that video? And why are cops even, in charge of behavioral problems in school, Peter?
It was horrific. And I don't want to be flip about it, but I'm glad it happened. And I'm glad it was videotaped, because this is played out in our schools, on our streets, all the time. And we feature these stories on Latest.com on a regular basis. But it takes these sort of, you really can't argue with it, situations to get people's attention and get people to focus on it. A lot of the police shootings, either for real or through the way that the police or the media manipulate them. Well, he might have had a gun. He was grabbing for my taser. They sort of leave an out for people who want to blindly support police violence, or even people who want to feel they're trying to evaluate these things. But when you see a 200-pound cop throw a high school girl to the floor for really no reason, it's real hard to argue that there's anything about that that's right. And I think it's these kind of dramatic episodes. If you think back, for example, to the Occupy movement, there was one of the great images was of a campus cop, one of the California schools, walking down a line of seated protesters, spraying them right in the face with tear gas. And those images stick in people's minds and are so unambiguous that hopefully they can kick off a more rational conversation. The people are saying, you listen to conservative talk radio in particular, well, the girl assaulted the police officer, or she was not being compliant in the sense that
even the sheriff said that, even as he fired him. Yeah,
I mean, you just can't. I mean, really, you can't say that. You can't make that argument that there's some justification for a cop to do what he did. And now, finally, in the age of ubiquitous video, we have eliminated the whole pile of bullshit that plagued particularly the African-American community for decades, which was the white cop sitting in the witness stand saying, "Your Honor, nothing untold happened here. You know, that guy is lying. He's a career criminal, a drug user. Of course I didn't slap him across the face with my flashlight," and juries would eat that stuff up. It's getting harder and harder for the cops to hide behind that, and I'm very glad. I'm sorry for what happened to the young lady, but for our society, I think it's not a bad thing.
Josh, do you think this was a racial thing, or do you just think this is what the police do on a regular basis? And why are they even in the school in the first place?
The thing about race and police is that, you know, the data that we have, whether it's from interactions with police to actual prosecutions to sentencing, I mean, the data is clear that it's worse for one racial group than another. However, I do think that just because that is the case, and that is a problem, I think that what we saw in that video was just a police with non-police. You know, the idea that, you know, compliance is the law. I mean, and it isn't really, but to the officers it is. And a lot of times Peter's right. Someone's record, lack of video, the officer's word is going to be taken every time. Even when there is video sometimes that clearly shows the situation wasn't nearly as life-threatening as perhaps they have said, it still goes the police officer's way. And what I find interesting is that because of the sort of polarized times we live in, it has to become a fucking team sport, and I don't understand why. You know, you're either against cops or for delinquents. I mean, I'm for the Fourth Amendment and for, you know, the idea that American citizens have rights, and that if you are an officer of the law, if you're entrusted with that power by people, you need to have, at the very least, the discretion of when to employ force like that. I don't know exactly what the lead up to the incident was. I defer to you guys on that one. I would just say that there has to be, for this and for almost every other story we see, there has to be a way to de-escalate these things. You know, if someone's pointing a gun at you, sure, then yes, it's time to draw your weapon and defend your life. But, you know, if someone's just giving you attitude, then, you know, maybe part of the training should be, okay, you let them get that over on you, because if you need to, you could shoot them. It should be less about justified, more about whether the use of force is necessary. And in that video, the use of force was completely unnecessary.
Well, Peter mentioned that, you know, hopefully this will spark conversation about it, but it doesn't really seem like anything has come of it. According to Fatal Encounters, an organization that compiles the amount of people killed by police, more than 1,400 people have been killed by police since Mike Brown was shot in Ferguson. I mean, there was no more publicized police shooting than that, and certainly the response of the militarized police after that. Eric, has anything actually changed, 1,400 fatal police shootings later, and what needs to change?
It's a good question. I think if we knew the answer, it would already be changed, but I don't think it's an issue that we can just put a quick answer to. There's always going to be the racial aspect in it, so you'll have police officers, as we were saying before, claiming that the African American is the violent criminal here. You'll have the black community saying that the police are being brutal towards them, and I don't know if there's an answer to this question that we could hash out and be sensible.
Well,
we don't know if that's up or down, Igor. That's the first time we've had 14 months of data on police shootings. I think the highest number the FBI ever put out with their, I don't remember what they called it, but it was their half-assed attempt to try and track police shootings. And it was 400, I think, was the worst. 430 was like the worst year ever. And, that's 4.5 months since Michael Brown happened, and we, media outlets that had the resources were able to start counting and compiling these numbers. So I think the thing about the 1,400 people being killed since Michael Brown is not so much it shows that cops are more or less violent than we thought. It shows that it's a bigger. I just think that the size of that number alone is something worth taking pause and going, wow, that's 100 people a month or more. And I think that adds a context to the discussion.
Eric?
Going back to what we said earlier. Oh, go ahead, Eric. Sorry.
I was going to say that, one thing I think, putting more thought into it, there's always the debate about police cameras, body cams and stuff. I do think that would be one of the best ways to set up a system of accountability, because if the police officer's doing their job properly and they have nothing to hide, there should be no reason why they wouldn't want to be recorded. If anything, it provides some protection in cases, let's say, where you arrest a female and they try to tell you that you raped them later on. A police cam will quickly dispel that myth. And I think in the case where these shootings happen, the body cam won't always tell the story, but it'll help provide a little bit of evidence to get rid of the conjecture in the argument.
If we had 1,400 people killed by terrorist attacks in the United States, people would be going insane over that. We can concede that of those 1,400 people shot by the police, some percentage were quote unquote legitimate, good kills. Fine. Pick a number in there that you're happy with. Take half and say if there were 700 people killed by terrorist attacks in the United States, we'd be going insane over this. I think the answer is not necessarily body cams, or they're part of the answer, because so much of this now is already on videotape. Citizens using their cell phones. And we see time and time again examples where where the police have out and out lied, and the videotape proves that. I think what we need is to enforce the laws and get rid of this idea that every cop has the perfect right to decide when and if lethal force is justified. We basically have this concept, and this is why most of these cops don't get successfully prosecuted, is the cop says, I thought my life was in danger. He reached into his waistband, so I thought he had a gun, so I shot him. He raised his hand, so I thought he was going to grab my taser, so I shot him. When the legal standard is that low, the individual officer's decision at the moment, well, of course you're not going to convict any cops. That's a very easy thing to do. And the idea is those kind of legal standards are never applied to civilian cases. If I go outside and somebody tries to assault me and I immediately blow them away with a weapon, a gun, I'm going to face some real questions and may find myself charged with manslaughter. The same thing with murder. We look carefully at the circumstances, but you can't just say, oh, yeah, I felt threatened by my wife having an affair, so I killed her. Oh, seems reasonable. We need to police the police.
Let me just make a quick point, Peter. Just something I want to add, because you're making very good points. If you look at England, for example, their police officers do not carry guns, yet you don't hear about rampant violence there. Is it something that we need? I'm not saying to get rid of firearms for police, but it goes to show that you don't need a gun to be safe. There are other ways to de-escalate situations, and maybe part of it is the American pastime, right, which is shootings and such.
Well, I think that's why American cops have to have guns, is because this is in England. There's a gun for every man, woman, and child in this country, but every man, woman, and child doesn't have a gun. So, I understand. And what I thought was interesting in both Eric's answer and Peter's answer was that in both of them, I heard arguments that the police have made, actually, to encroach on our rights. Eric said that, if they had nothing to hide, why wouldn't they want to wear the body cams? Which, we've all heard that with search warrants. If you have nothing to hide, why can't the cop search your car? And Peter, you were talking about the sort of like the defense of stand your ground as a policy. It's like, I thought my life was in danger, and in a lot of states that really works. But I do think that Peter did hit a very good point in that, it's this civilian comparison that makes it sort of enraging. If a police officer, because again, when you're out there, someone's going in their waistband, maybe you think they have a gun. Like, I understand how the shootings happen. What needs to happen, though, is they need to face the exact same scrutiny that a civilian would have faced if they would have shot a person in that instance. And until that happens, we will have this us versus them sort of divide. It will be this team sports thing instead of talking about our rights as Americans and how best to defend them.
Curling back to the body cam thing, first I thought Eric might have been being a little bit sarcastic about nothing to hide, nothing to fear. But even if he wasn't, going to your point about search warrants and things, there is a critical difference between public employees who are given permission to use lethal force in certain circumstances being subjected to scrutiny versus citizens who have inherent rights under the Constitution. So there's a difference in there, and I think it's an important difference about the police wearing body cams or being subjected to more scrutiny. We give them a badge, we give them a gun. The law currently gives them enormous leeway in when to use those things. And so I think there is something of a difference there without violating the question of that. As far as my own remark about stand your ground, I was trying to show I don't support stand your ground in any way.
No, I wasn't saying you did. I was just saying that people who defend stand your ground have made similar arguments as you were making. And yes, there is a difference with, the fact that these are peace officers entrusted with power given by the people. But so in a sense, you're right that they should deserve almost more scrutiny, but then no one would become a police officer. It's why we only get idiots running for office nowadays, because, if you've ever sent a dirty text message, as soon as you run for office, it's going to hit the internet. So, I think that the realistic sort of level we can get to is, if letting the civilian and the police officers in those cases sort of get even with the law. Let it be the same for both. And I feel that most people would feel better about the system that way. I mean, it may not address any of the problems. They may kill more, use force more. They may not. Who knows how it would work out? I just think that I know personally I would be able to rationalize it better if there weren't two sets of standards. And I think...
Yes, and building on your idea of standards, in most cases where a police department does get in trouble, it's an internal investigation always. They're policing themselves. So they basically, of course, they're going to side with their own officer and brush him to the table. There needs to be some kind of body that overlooks these cases and comes at it without being biased, which maybe is impossible, but it needs to happen because, as you guys were saying, both sides need to be accountable.
All right. Well, and, we've seen that. We had a incident here in New York. I'm sorry. We had an incident here in New York, a month ago or so, and I think we covered it extensively on Latest.com, where a African-American tennis star was tackled violently in front of a hotel. The cops claimed it was a mistaken identity. Boy, did the city of New York jump all over that. The investigation was covered very quickly. The cop was either suspended or fired. I mean, apologies were made. There was a whole bunch of quick cleanup done because it was a celebrity. These standards need to be aligned with one another and reality. It's not, as Josh put it out, and that will always cause problems. It causes problems for the cops. People are less and less likely to want to be involved positively with the police for fear of who knows what's going to happen. I mean, once you start interacting with the cops, you lose control of it. I'm going to keep my mouth shut around the police. I don't want to invite them into my world.
All right. Well, the New York Times...
Forget, too, that some cultures have a distrust for the police naturally, too.
Yes, well, for good reason. The New York Times recently asked readers whether they would kill baby Hitler if they had the chance to go back in time. I think I would just send baby Hitler to better art classes. But, Eric, would you kill baby Hitler, and how would you do it?
No, I don't think I would kill baby Hitler.
Why wouldn't you kill baby Hitler? He's going to kill all those people.
For adoption. Well, in this scenario, do we have control to influence his future, or is it just going to repeat? That's the real question.
Well, the New York Times.
Well, that's the question of every time travel story. Fate or
I'm not going to condone killing babies. As a father myself of a young baby, I'm not going to condone killing babies.
Josh, kill baby Hitler?
Well, here's the thing. Like Eric said, the question is not whether or not you'd kill baby Hitler. Is are we destined to do what we do, or maybe if you love and some crayons, maybe he would have been a nicer guy. There's no way to know. If it's fate, if destiny is real, then yeah, of course you've got to kill baby Hitler if you give the chance. But if we actually do have free will and you can influence and maybe change something, you don't. Of course, in time travel stories, every time you try to influence the future, you end up creating the future you tried to avoid. So maybe the answer is not to kill baby Hitler.
All the Germans get killed. Peter, kill baby Hitler or give him crayons?
Peter, as someone who looks like a baby.
Yeah, so I'm thrilled, first of all, that the New York Times is, on these kind of stories, that they're not just wasting their time, reporting, critical world news. But, first of all, I think killing baby Hitler is the greatest argument in favor of abortion anyone could make. I mean, that would take the matter completely out of our hands. That said, having seen all the time travel movies, to hell with it, I'd kill baby Hitler. And, if we woke up in 2015 and dinosaurs roam the earth and, things like that, well, my bad. But I'd take the chance.
Well, Peter, would you donate the fetus to Planned Parenthood?
I eat it. I literally eat the fetus.
Well, I think
you would take on his power, like...
Yeah.
True. Then I would have the soul of baby Hitler. And, who knows where things could go at that point.
I think the better question is one that I saw in Josh's Let's Kill Baby Hitler post, and that's, would you rather fight 100 baby-sized Hitlers or one Hitler-sized baby? Eric?
1,000 little ones.
Cass?
I'm going one Hitler-sized baby.
Yeah, that would swarm you, right?
I think I could take a big baby.
No, I got to go with the full-size one. I mean, all you need is, one good shot to the Hitler nads and
to the soft spot of the head, because if it's still a baby, it's just you get it in that soft spot.
So,
yeah, I just still have that here. Right. I mean, with all those babies, I mean, who knows? Who knows what could happen?
So let me come in with a story, because there was an article today, too, with Lindsey Graham, and he was asked, who would you date?
Can we kill baby Lindsey Graham?
Hang on. So let me finish. The question was, though, who would you date, marry, or kill? Although they didn't word it kill, they said get rid of. The choices were Hillary Clinton, Carly Fiorina, or Sarah Palin. Igor?
I would date Sarah Palin.
His answer was John McCain for all of them.
Yeah.
I would date Sarah Palin, and like Lindsey Graham, I would marry Carly for the money, and then I would get rid of Hillary. Eric?
Wait, which one means, date?
Yes.
Or marry? Which one means that one?
Date.
Date. Okay.
Yeah, wait, what was the third choice? Was it actually kill? Did they?
No, I believe it was
Did they say
disappear forever.
Get rid of?
Disappear forever.
Just make her disappear.
Because with the
Send back
naughty
to the
one,
Lord.
yeah, with the naughty one, you got to go Palin. I mean, there's really no question. Whichever the naughty one is. But yeah, Carly for the money, and God, get rid of Hillary Clinton.
I think we're all in agreement on this. With that, let's say goodbye to everybody.
I'll take Joe Biden.
Take Joe Biden. And with that, let's say goodbye to everybody. Let's go, Mets. Keep reading Latest.com. All right, we're good.
We didn't hang up.
That was a fun one.